The M1 Garand did more than replace an older rifle. It changed the rhythm of American infantry combat. Once Marine and Army units began receiving it in real numbers, especially after early Pacific fighting, ordinary riflemen could put out faster, smoother fire than armies still leaning heavily on bolt actions. That mattered in the first exchange, when the side that settled into fire superiority first often owned the fight. Later generations turned the Garand into near scripture, and the rifle earned plenty of that respect. But its legend also rests on something bigger. America was one of the few countries that could actually mass issue a semi-automatic rifle and keep feeding it into a global war. The Thompson M1928A1 was the kind of gun that announced itself before you even explained it. Heavy, expensive, and full of old-world machining, it still gave American troops brutal close-range automatic fire in patrols, jungle fighting, shipboard security, and sudden assaults. At short distances, it hit like a hammer and felt like a weapon built for violent work. But the longer the war went on, the more the Thompson looked like a survivor from another age, one that loved craftsmanship more than mass production. That is why it never sits in history quietly. One side sees the classic American submachine gun. The other sees a beautiful weapon that made less sense every year the war expanded. The M1 Carbine was not built to replace the Garand. It was built for the thousands of men who needed something better than a pistol and lighter than a full rifle. Drivers, radio operators, mortar crews, officers, and support troops moving through a modern mechanized war. In that role, it was smart, handy, and quick to live with. It gave people a weapon they would actually carry instead of one they would resent. The trouble started later, when people judged it like a frontline battle rifle instead of the lightweight defensive arm it was meant to be. That left it stuck in one of the longest-running arguments in American small arms history, either one of the war's smartest compromises or a weapon whose reputation drifted well past its intended job. By World War II, the Springfield M1903 was already an old soldier. Officially, the Garand had replaced it. In reality, America entered the war still needing every dependable rifle it could get. The M1903 kept serving because it was accurate, rugged, and trusted by men who cared more about a rifle working than a rifle being modern. It also remained useful in specialized roles where precision still mattered. That gives the M1903 a very strange afterlife in memory. Some people talk about it like a relic the war had already outgrown. Others see a rifle that refused to become irrelevant simply because the calendar said it should. The M1911A1 later was not there to dominate a battlefield. It was there to be the sidearm men trusted when the fight got close, confused, and personal. Officers, vehicle crews, military police, and countless others carried it because it had already built a reputation for reliability and fight-stopping confidence. In a filthy war, that counted. The 1911A1 later became larger in legend than it ever was in actual battlefield influence. But there is a reason the legend held. Many pistols are just backup tools. This one rarely felt like a backup in the hands of the man carrying it. It felt like insurance that might actually work. If the original M1903 carried the aura of craftsmanship, the M1903A3 carried the logic of total war. It was simplified for faster production and easier wartime output, which is exactly what America needed when old stocks, new demands, and global deployment all collided at once. It was not glamorous, and that is exactly why it matters. Weapons like the A3 rarely become myths because they are too practical to feel romantic. But wars are not won by romance. They are won by guns that can be built fast enough, issued widely enough, and trusted long enough. In that sense, the M1903A3 may say more about how America fought the war than the more celebrated rifle that came before it. The M1903A4 was America's practical answer to the sniper problem. Adopted in 1943 and built specifically for telescopic sight use, it was not a flashy wonder weapon from a later precision era. It was a workmanlike solution, simple, standardized, and good enough to get real scoped rifles into service. That matters more than people sometimes admit. In wartime, a rifle that can be fielded consistently is often more valuable than one that looks better in theory. The A4 later gained a reputation as a kind of stopgap sniper rifle, and there is truth in that. But there is also another truth. Without plain tools like this, America's sniper capability in World War II would have looked much thinner than memory likes to imagine. The M1A1 Carbine pushed the carbine concept into the airborne world. Its folding stock made it easier to carry in aircraft, gliders, and jumps, which mattered to paratroopers who could not afford full-size awkwardness. It looked compact, modern, and purpose-built for mobility, and in many ways it was. But the folding stock image later became almost too successful. People remembered the silhouette, the paratrooper glamour, and the visual identity of the weapon before they remembered its limits. It still fired the same cartridge and lived inside the same role as the standard carbine. So the old argument never vanished. Was it the perfect airborne answer, or just the best compromise that looked cooler than it actually solved the problem? The Thompson M1A1 was what happened when America took the Thompson seriously as a wartime utility weapon instead of a polished icon. It stripped away complexity, simplified production, and kept the short-range punch squads still valued. It was still heavy, still unmistakably a Thompson, but now it fit industrial reality better than the elegant earlier versions. That split the Thompson legacy in a useful way. The gun people celebrate in memory is often the ornate, early war Thompson. The gun the war actually wanted was closer to the M1A1, less theatrical, more practical, and more honest about what mass war demands from a submachine gun. The M3 grease gun looked cheap because it was meant to be cheap. That was not its weakness. That was its mission. Designed as a lower-cost substitute for the Thompson, it gave tank crews, paratroopers, and compact weapon users something short, controllable, and much easier to manufacture on a wartime scale. It never had the Thompson's swagger, but swagger does not matter much to a production line. The M3 had flaws, and later improvements admitted that. Even so, it exposes one of the most interesting divides in how people judge weapons. A lot of people still confuse elegance with quality. Total war usually rewards the gun that can be made faster, issued sooner, and abused longer. The Winchester M1897 trench gun survived into World War II because there were still environments where it did something nothing else did quite the same way. In jungle fighting, bunker clearing, night raids, and very short assaults, a combat shotgun could end a problem at distances where the rest of the argument disappeared. Marines used shotguns like this in Pacific fighting, where range collapsed fast and violence became immediate. That is why the M1897 carries such a hard-edged reputation. But the real story is less dramatic than the myth. Its value was not about being fearsome in theory. Its value was about being brutally efficient when combat stopped pretending to be orderly. The Ithaca 37 is one of those weapons that serious enthusiasts remember more clearly than the general public. It was a solid military shotgun with a strong design pedigree and real wartime service, but it never got the volume of memory that followed the Winchester trench guns. Visibility was the problem, not usefulness. Production was limited, and the company was redirected toward other wartime priorities, including M1911A1 pistol work. That left the Ithaca 37 in an awkward place historically. Good enough to serve, rare enough to be overlooked, and permanently overshadowed by louder names. It is a reminder that being effective and being remembered are not the same thing in military history. The M1917 Revolver felt like history being pulled back into uniform. Originally adopted in World War I to help cover shortages of the M1911, it returned because large wars have a way of making armies practical again. It was not exciting, but it was dependable, and sharing .45 ACP ammunition with the 1911A1 helped keep wartime logistics cleaner than introducing something completely new. That gave the revolver real value, even if it never regained center stage. The M1917 rarely appears in glamorous retellings of World War II, and maybe that makes it even more revealing. Whenever elegance ran out and scale took over, old tools like this kept getting remembered by the people who actually had to arm everyone. The M1941 Johnson rifle remains fascinating because it always sounds like it almost changed history. Designed by Melvin Johnson in the years before the war, it offered unusual features like a detachable barrel and a 10-round rotary magazine. That made it especially attractive to certain Marine formations, including paratroops, and it did see limited service. But limited is the key word. It never displaced the Garand, never gained the same institutional momentum, and never built the production muscle needed to become America's main rifle answer. That is why the Johnson still lives in argument, not as a forgotten miracle, but as one of those weapons that got just close enough to the mainstream to keep people imagining a different outcome. The Reising M50 is a near-perfect lesson in how paper logic can collapse under field conditions. It was lighter and cheaper than the Thompson, and in clean shooting conditions, it could seem accurate, controllable, and very promising. That made it attractive to Marine units that wanted automatic fire without Thompson-level weight and cost. Then the Pacific happened. Dirt, humidity, salt air, and rough handling exposed reliability problems fast, and the Reising's reputation began to unravel. That left it trapped between two truths. It was not useless, and it was not insane to adopt, but it belonged to that dangerous category of weapon that appears convincing in theory and punishingly fragile in the kind of war America was actually fighting. The Reising M55 took the same basic idea and pushed it toward airborne mobility with a folding stock. On paper, that looked smart. It was lighter, more compact, and clearly aimed at troops who needed movement and portability first. But the battlefield does not care whether an idea looks smart on paper. The same realities that damaged the M50 followed the M55 as well: harsh conditions, maintenance problems, and the inability of a neat concept to survive a dirty war unchanged. And that makes it a fitting way to end this list. Not every American infantry weapon of World War II became a legend. Some became warnings about how quickly combat can strip the shine off a clever design. Next time, we move past rifles and into the weapons that really made American infantry dangerous as a system: machine guns, mortars, bazookas, flamethrowers, and the support firepower that made all these rifles matter even more.